Hi, and welcome to our next video on semantics pragmatics. This week we're going to talk about historical semantics and feature analysis. Last week we talked a bit about the development of meaning when we talked about the development of the basic color terms in English. Today we're going to talk about a more abstract thing, about the so-called semantic features, which you might already know from your introductory classes. And we're also going to have a look at how we can employ these features to study meaning change. We're also going to talk about lions and alcoholic beverages. Right. Okay, so as a short recap, you know that phonemes can be described by comparing them to other phonemes and by marking the differences. So if we, for example, have a look at sounds such as b and p in bin and pin, or sin and sing, or c and t, we might come up with a table of features that we can either mark as present or absent in the sound, right? So, and if we compare these pairs of sounds based on their features, we can see that, for example, bin and pin are only differ in terms of voiced or not voiced. Sin and sing differ in one feature, and that is velar, and C and T differ in terms of fricative or non-fricative. The same principle can also be used when we talk about lexemes, right? So, for example, the difference between the words boy and girl, man and boy, mother and aunt can also be described with these features, such as plus human, minus adult for boy and girl, right? And then we see that the thing that distinguishes them from each other is the feature plus minus female. With man and boy, this distinctive feature is then plus minus adult. And if we have a look at mother and aunt, we'll see that the distinctive feature will be something like plus minus your parent. So the basic idea that we have here in this componential feature-based analysis is that more complex meaning can be analyzed and reduced to a combination of less complex components of meaning. That's why it's called componential analysis. The assumptions behind this idea are that, first off, that meaning is a static thing that we can describe. This is an idealized way of approaching meaning, because we know that meaning changes and that we can't really consider meaning without its context. But this is the assumption that lies behind or underneath the componential analysis of meaning. We also assume that expressions have their inherent meaning that can be analyzed as a set of semantic atoms. By inherent meaning, what we mean by that is that you can tell what a word means or what an expression means without knowing the context. And it is also in opposition to the so-called emergent or emergentist view of language and meaning, which says that meaning cannot be understood without its context, without the interaction of which it makes part. But if we are happy with these basic assumptions, and for many purposes, we can accept these assumptions. So if we accept these assumptions, we can work with with componential analysis of meaning and with semantic features. Another question that begs itself is, how do we actually know that there are such things as semantic features? Well, there are a number of reasons why we can assume something like that. First one are partial similarities in meaning between different words or different expressions. So, for example, we have here a lioness, female lion, and if we compare it to a related word, lion, a male lion, we see that they are lioness and lion are not two completely different words, but they have something in common. And what this something is the semantic feature that they share. By the same token, we can say, for example, that on the left-hand side, orange juice with tonic water is partially similar to gin and tonic on the right-hand side. They both consist of tonic water. And that's also a feature that they share. Right. Another thing that we can use to show that there is something like features, like semantic features within a more complex meaning of an expression, are correlations in meaning. A correlation in meaning describes a particular type of partial similarities, of shared correlated similarities. Right? So if we have a look at this table and at the pair of words that we see there, adult, child, sheep, lamb, man, boy, woman, girl, they can be described as intersections of the features human, adult, human, young, sheep, adult, sheep, young, and so forth. And if we now take a look at a sentence such as, make sure that the lambs do not get separated from the sheep, it would first appear that lambs are sheep. They have the feature plus sheep, and so that it should be polysemous or ambiguous. But if such a word appears in a correlation, it ceases to be ambiguous, right? So the context is important in this case, right? So if we say such a sentence, make sure that the lambs do not get separated from the sheep, even though a lamb is a sheep, there is the feature plus sheep, the example is a completely normal example and everybody would understand it. On the other hand, correlation is not always sufficient to fully describe the meaning of a word, right? So it depends on what features do we use at the end of the day. So, for example, a feature such as plus young and plus sheep will unambiguously give us the meaning lamb, but, for example, the features plus young plus female or plus young plus human will not give us the meaning of girl. There we would need all three features to get that meaning, young, female, and human. Another way how to show that there is such a thing as semantic features is if we look at discontinuities in meaning. Let us consider the sentence, I almost waked her. This sentence is, again, ambiguous. There are at least two different readings of it. It can first mean something like almost caused to wake, almost wake, or it can also mean cause to almost wake. So in the first case, it would be something like, I was on the point of carrying out an action which would have caused her to wake, but I didn't. right? So I managed not to wake her. In the second case, there is a slight difference, because it doesn't mean that I didn't wake the person, but that I didn't wake the person completely. And what this shows us is that the features cause and wake of the verb wake are discrete, which is a basic thing of semantic features, but they are also separable. And we can interpret the verb in at least two different ways. Right. Furthermore, we also have parallels to morphology, right? So, such as morphologically simple and complex expressions can be divided into smaller parts, into smaller, more simpler morphemes. We can also do that with semantics and with meaning. For example, if we take a look at the word untrue, meaning not true, not veracious, we can distinguish these two features, not or negative, and veracious, being true. And there is an iconic relation between morphemes and their semantic features, right? So we have two morphemes with each morpheme representing exactly one semantic feature, right? The negative feature, and true, the veracious feature. At the same time, there is a synonym for untrue, which would be false. Again, the word false would have the same semantic features because it has the same meaning as untrue. But there is not this iconic relation between the form and the semantic features, because there is just one morpheme but two semantic features. Right? So we see that there are two features, which might be, but not necessarily are, always represented by two different morphemes. This brings us to the concept of markedness. Right? So markedness, those of you familiar with that, is a term adopted or introduced in the structuralist phonological tradition of the Prague linguistic school. People like Roman Jakobson, Nikolai Trubetskoy, and so forth. And it was also later on adopted in the generative grammar by Noam Chomsky and others. And markedness is used to describe a special type of semantic contrast. So, for example, let's have a look at the following sentence. There were 10 lions in the zoo. All of them were lionesses. This would be an acceptable sentence. However, if we turn it around and make out of it, there were 10 lionesses in the zoo, all of them were lions. This would be slightly off or completely impossible. Depends. So what we see here is that one form has both a restricted and a more general meaning. This would be lion, whereas another form is only showing the more restricted meaning, right? So a lion can be both male lion and a female lion, used to refer to all genders of a lion, but a lioness is a word that only refers to female lions. And now here is another interesting thing that I'm not going to discuss any further in this video, but it's interesting to discuss or think about what features do we actually use, right? So a lioness, what is the feature, what is the defining semantic feature that we use to describe it, describe the word? Is it minus male, meaning the absence of a male semantic feature? Or is it the presence of a female semantic feature, right? But by the same token, if we talk about lions, do we have plus male or do we have minus female? Right, so these are some questions that we can think about when we describe the meaning of words using semantic features. There is a question, of course, whether markedness is a helpful notion. So if we go back for a minute, right, so lioness would be the marked term, whereas lion would be the unmarked one, right? Because lioness can only be used in a more restricted sense, whereas lion is more general, therefore unmarked. And the question is whether this is really helpful, and what does it, and if it is helpful, it might be helpful, but what does it actually say? And the question is also whether the idea of markedness is really only a linguistic one, right? So this is something that we see in the discussion when talking about a gender-neutral or inclusive language. Because what is actually the reason for example, cow is unmarked as opposed to a bull? And what is the reason for dog not being marked as opposed to a word such as bitch, which would mean only a female dog? And the reason is very likely simply frequency. Meaning unmarked entities are simply more common than marked ones, right? So if you ever see a cow, it's probably a female cow. That's more commonly simply encountered by the speakers of a language than a bull. And the same would also apply for, at least historically, for human, for words that represent or refer to humans, right? So, for example, poet was originally almost exclusively plus male, but nowadays it's not the case, but that's where the gender-neutral language discussions would start. But this is also something that is definitely interesting and worth discussing, but we can't really discuss it in this video. Right, so now we know that there is something like semantic features. And what we can do with it is we can actually build semantic categories based on that. So, for example, synonyms would be sets of words having identical sets of semantic features, right? So, for example, elevator and lift would have the same semantic features because they mean the same thing. They refer to the same thing. Antonyms would be words that share a set of semantic features with the opposite value, right? So life, death. Life would be plus life, death minus life, something like that. Hyponyms, right, would be defined by having a more restricted sets of semantic features than hyperonyms, right? And hyperonyms are less restricted in their semantic features. We can also use semantic features to show lexical contrasts, right? So, for example, if we compare an expression such as chair with an expression such as thought, we can see that there is one crucial semantic feature that these lexemes differ in, right? So, for example, minus concrete, or chair and cat, the very important feature would be inanimate, which, right, so chair is inanimate, cat isn't, and so forth. the same can be also used for verbs. Okay, but there are also problems with semantic features. First of all, semantic features are circular, meaning semantic features should actually underlie actual words in language, right? So if we have something like a cat, right, the semantic feature should be something less complex than a cat. But if we have a semantic feature such as plus feline, then this is not really less complex, and it's based on words of the language, right? And again, this is a discussion that we sort of had when we talked about the idea of language of thought. Then we talked about the problem of infinite regress, right? How to explain complex meaning or complex concepts with less complex ones. Right, another thing is that there is no complete list of features that would be needed to analyze all words of a given language. Right, so we keep thinking, we keep coming up with new features as we analyze different words. And this is probably also one of the central points of criticism of semantic features, and that is it doesn't actually consider the context of the expression, right? So, for example, we talked about synonyms, and I said that lift and elevator have the same semantic features, but this doesn't mean that you can always use lift in the same context as expression and mean the same thing, right? So there are slight differences in connotations and so forth. Another thing is that semantic features are binary. It's always either plus or minus. Something is either present or absent. But binarity is not always the best way how to do things, right? As we saw with color terms, it's not that something either is red or isn't, right? There are other things that we have to consider. And boundaries between two categories can be fuzzy. Right. Another thing is that that some concepts, most importantly relative concepts, are difficult to analyze using semantic features. So, for example, adjectives such as small, rich, old, tall, clean, intelligent, and so forth are relative, right? For example, a small mouse is smaller than a small elephant. And how could you actually describe that using semantic features? Small would probably have a semantic feature, probably something like minus big. But again, a big mouse is smaller than a small elephant, so problematic. Another thing is that category membership, if defined by using semantic features, is not gradable, right? So all members are equally good examples. So words such as sparrow and robin and penguin and ostrich would all have the feature plus bird, but they would not really. You would need more semantic features to describe that they are not all prototypical birds. And the word prototypical is important if we want to do something different than semantic features, which would be semantics based on prototype theory, which you probably already know a bit, right? But which describes members of a category based on goodness of example, right? So a robin would be a very good example of the category bird, whereas other animals are less good examples of that category. And for example, something like a fish is not a member of that category at all. But we're not going to talk about prototype theory today. This is something for a next video. Thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Bye.